Episode 3 of Space Prison by Tom Godwin. Read by Mark Nelson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Space Prison, Episode 3. The days dragged by in the weary routine, but overworked muscles slowly strengthened, and people moved with a little less laborious effort. On the 20th day, the wall was finally completed, and the camp was prowler-proof. But the spring weather was a mad succession of heat and cold and storm that caused the hell fever to take its toll each day, and there was no relaxation from the grueling labor. Weatherproof shelters had to be built as rapidly as possible. So the work of constructing them began, wearily, sometimes almost hopelessly, but without complaint other than to hate and curse the Gurns more than ever. There was no more trouble from Bemin. Prentice had almost forgotten him when he was publicly challenged one night by a burly, threatening man named Hagar. "You've bragged that you'll fight any man who dares disagree with you," Hagar said loudly. "Well, here I am. We'll use knives, and before they even have time to bury you tonight, I'm going to have your stooges kicked out and replaced with men who'll give us competent leadership instead of blundering authoritarianism." Prentice noticed that Hagar seemed to have a little difficulty pronouncing the last word, as though he had learned it only recently. "I'll be glad to accommodate you," Prentice said mildly. "Go get yourself a knife." Hagar already had one, a long-bladed butcher knife, and the duel began. Hagar was surprisingly adept with his knife, but he had never had the training and experience in combat that interstellar explorers such as Prentice had. Hagar was good, but considerably far from good enough. Prentice did not kill him. He had no compunctions about doing such a thing, but it would have been an unnecessary waste of needed manpower. He gave Hagar a carefully painful and bloody lesson that thoroughly banished all his lust for conflict without seriously injuring him. The duel was over within a minute after it began. Bemin, who had witnessed the challenge with keen interest and then watched Hagar's defeat with agitation, became excessively friendly and flattering toward Prentice afterward. Prentice felt sure, although he had no proof, that it had been Bemin who had spurred the simple-minded Hagar into challenging him to a duel. If so, the sight of what had happened to Hagar must have effectively dampened Bemin's desire for revenge, because he became almost a model worker. As Lake had predicted, he and Prentice worked together well. Lake calmly took a secondary role, not at all interested in possession of authority, but only in the survival of the rejects. He spoke of the surrender of the Constellation only once, to say, "I knew there could be only Ragnarok in this section of space. I had to order 4,000 people to go like sheep to what was to be their place of execution, so that 4,000 more could live as slaves. That was my last act as an officer." Prentice suspected that Lake found it impossible not to blame himself subconsciously for what circumstances had forced him to do. It was irrational, but conscientious men were quite often a little irrational in their sense of responsibility. Lake had two sub-leaders, a genial red-haired man named Ben Barber, who would have been a farmer on Athena, but who had made a good sub-leader on Ragnarok, and a lithe, cat-like man named Carl Schroeder. Schroeder claimed to be 24, but not even the scars on his face could make him look more than 21. He smiled often, a little too often. Prentice had seen smiles like that before. Schroeder was the type who could smile while he killed a man, and he probably had. But if Schroeder was a born fighter, and perhaps killer, they were characteristics that he expended entirely upon the Prowlers. He was Lake's right-hand man, a deadly marksman and utterly without fear. One evening, when Lake had given Schroeder some instructions concerning the next day's activities, Schroeder answered him with a half-mocking smile and the words, "I'll see that it's done, Commander." "Not Commander," Lake said. All of us, left our ranks, titles, and honors on the Constellation. The past is dead for us." "I see," Schroeder said. The smile faded away, and he looked into Lake's eyes as he asked, "And what about our past dishonors, disgraces, and such?" "They were left on the Constellation too," Lake said. "If anyone wants dishonor, he'll have to earn it all over again." "That sounds fair," Schroeder said. "That sounds as fair as anyone could ever ask for." He turned away, and Prentice saw what he had noticed before. Schroeder's black hair was coming out light brown at the roots. It was a color that would better match his light complexion, and it was the color of hair that a man named Schrader, wanted by the police on Venus, had had. Hair could be dyed, identification cards could be forged, but it was all something Prentice did not care to pry into until and if Schroeder gave him reason to. Schroeder was a hard and dangerous man, despite his youth, and sometimes men of that type, when the chips were down, exhibited a higher sense of duty than the soft men who spoke piously of respect for society, and then were afraid to face danger to protect the society and the people they claimed to respect. A lone prowler came on the 11th night following the wall's completion. It came silently, in the dead of night, and it learned how to reach in and tear apart the leather lashings that held the pointed stakes in place and then jerk the stakes out of their sockets. It was seen as it was removing the third stake, which would have made a large enough opening for it to come through, and shot. It fell back and managed to escape into the woods, although staggering and bleeding. The next night, the stockade was attacked by dozens of prowlers who simultaneously began removing the pointed stakes in the same manner employed by the prowler of the night before. Their attack was turned back with heavy losses on both sides, and with a dismayingly large expenditure of precious ammunition. There could be no doubt about how the band of prowlers had learned to remove the stakes. The prowler of the night before had told them before it died. It was doubtful that the prowlers had a spoken language, but they had some means of communication. They worked together, and they were highly intelligent, probably about halfway between a dog and man. The prowlers were going to be an enemy even more formidable than Prentice had thought. The missing stakes were replaced the next day, and the others were tied down more securely. Once again, the camp was prowler-proof, but only for so long as armed guards patrolled inside the walls to kill attacking prowlers during the short time it would take them to remove the stakes. The hunting party suffered unusually heavy losses from prowler attacks that day and that evening. As the guards patrolled inside the walls, Lake said to Prentice, "The prowlers are so damnably persistent. It isn't that they're hungry. They don't kill us to eat us. They don't have any reason to kill us. They just hate us." "They have a reason," Prentice said. "They're doing the same thing we're doing, fighting for survival." Lake's pale brows lifted in question. "The Prowlers are the rulers of Ragnarok," Prentice said. "They fought their way up here, as men did on Earth, until they're master of every creature on their world. Even of the unicorns and the swamp crawlers. But now we've come, and they're intelligent enough to know that we're accustomed to being the dominant species ourselves. There can't be two dominant species on the same world, and they know it. Men or prowlers. In the end, one is going to have to go down before the other." "I suppose you're right," Lake said. He looked at the guards, a fourth of them already reduced to bows and arrows that they had not yet had time to learn how to use. "If we win the battle for supremacy, it will be a long fight, maybe over a period of centuries. And if the Prowlers win, it may all be over within a year or two." The giant blue star that was the other component of Ragnarok's binary grew swiftly in size as it preceded the yellow sun farther each morning. When summer came, the blue star would be a sun as hot as the yellow sun, and Ragnarok would be between them. The yellow sun would burn the land by day, and the blue sun would sear it by night that would not be night. Then would come the brief fall, followed by the long, frozen winter, when the yellow sun would shine pale and cold far to the south, and the blue sun would be a star again.